I would have given anything to have my parents and brother here still. This is their story. This is their journey. They're just living on through me and the kids too. I think it's a nice way to be able to carry your grief.
You just lost your loved one. Now what? Welcome to the Grief in Life podcast, where we explore this new reality through grief-colored lenses. Openly, authentically, I'm your host, Nina Rodriguez. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Moira, a certified grief educator from New Zealand, who has journeyed through profound loss, including the death of her mother, brother, and father in only a 5-year span. Now living in Madrid, Moira has channeled her passion for helping others into her work as a grief coach, an educator, and a community curator. She created GriefSpan, an online community supporting grievers, as well as an expat community called Roaming Mamas. Moira, thank you so much for being here today, and I would like to give you a very warm welcome to the Grief in Life podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Nina. It's really lovely to be here.
It's a pleasure, and I'm so thrilled that we connected through our online community. Actually, you have this beautiful curated page, and we also connected through Kara, Get Griefy, who's done an amazing job of kind of centralizing all these scattered pieces of us that are in the virtual world.
She's definitely
right?
got a knack. She's amazing.
Yes. And so you're currently in Madrid, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yeah, we've been here about 6 years now. We actually moved from the UK, which was where I was for about 12 years when I started my travels. When I left New Zealand, and New Zealand was my home for about 29 years before I upped and started packing up and leaving and doing it's a lot of, it's one of those things that Kiwis do a lot of, is travel overseas and do the OE thing. But I just never went back. Well, never went back to live anyway. One, because I met my husband in London, so that was nice.
That's a good excuse.
Yeah, I thought that was a good enough excuse. But unfortunately, that of course meant that sort of left my family in New Zealand, which, you always take that risk when you're, leaving countries and moving around the world and those kind of things, not knowing if you'll ever go back. So leaving your loved ones behind is not always easy, but, you also have to live your life. So it's, So that was what my story was there in terms of being here, because my husband actually got a job in Spain. And the kids were very little then. I've got a little girl who's 9 and a little boy who's 6. And they were quite little when we moved here. So it's been the most amazing transition for us and different life. And we just love it. It's awesome here.
That's amazing. Well, we were chatting before. I absolutely love Madrid, and it's such a beautiful space to live. So I'm glad that you get to, enjoy it and thrive and live your life there. And like you said, it's in the spirit of taking risks and living life and, moving through all the transitions, expected and unexpected. And that's a big, big change. So kudos to you and for braving that change. It's not easy to just let go of everything and just, decide to take a chance on yourself. And I think that's I always admire that trait in people. So I admire that in you. But unfortunately, a lot of this story is not all happy. It's, been a very challenging personal journey, especially with the loss of what you could say is your entire immediate family, which crushes my heart just to hear it. And I know how incredibly difficult that could be. So tell us how that happened, or start wherever you'd like.
Sure. So back in 2014, when I was still living in the UK, my mum had always been ill. She was the first in my family to go, like immediate family. And so there was only me, my brother, and my dad growing up in New Zealand. And my mum had suffered quite a lot. Ever since she was about 30, she'd got rheumatoid arthritis. So the whole time I was growing up, she was generally not physically well. Everything else was fine, but she really suffered a lot with not being able to be very active and not doing a lot. So as a kid, I kind of adjusted to that life of, my mum wasn't so active, but my dad was okay. He was pretty good. He had some health challenges too, but nothing physical to begin with anyway. So my mum, she'd been in and out of hospital, but nothing what we would have considered life-threatening. And at the time when I got the call from Dad, or typically parents don't tend to want to worry you, and my dad hadn't told me that my mum was going into hospital. She'd been sort of, I guess she was rushed in one day, and my dad told me a couple of days later. But again, we didn't think it was life-threatening, and this kind of progressed over a series of about 3 or 4 days. But it was only about 2 weeks prior to that I had rung mum and dad to tell them the most amazing news that we were pregnant for the first time. And we'd been
Talk about
trying for two
contrast,
years.
right?
Yeah, complete different. Yeah, it all just turned around so quickly. So after about, mum had been in the hospital for about a week, I think it was, and I just had this gut feeling. And I said to my husband, I said, I need to go. I need to get on a flight. And of course, he was worried about me being pregnant, our first pregnancy, all of that stuff, and high risk. And yeah, so, but I just had to go. I just had this gut feeling something wasn't right. I'd been speaking to mum on the phone, sort of in and out when she was in hospital, but I could hear she wasn't right. And of course she was like, no, you can't get on the plane. You don't want to. Like, mum, I'm just coming. But in that time I got on the flight, and it was the worst flight in my life. Like, seriously, I was so sick. It was 30 hours or 27, 30 hours worth of just, not going to deny it was pretty hard. I got there, and during the time of the flight, she was actually getting worse, and she declined, and they shifted my flight from another airport to directly into the airport where the hospital was. So all of this was going on. And so by the time I got to the hospital, my brother was there. He picked me up from the hospital. We got there. Doctors told us pretty much the worst news and said that she wasn't going to pull through. And my mum had already decided. She was so proud. She was an amazing mum, but she was one of those very proud. I can't be a burden on anyone. She would never have gone into a home. And he already decided that she wasn't going to be a burden on anyone. She didn't want to be incubated. She didn't know what was the outcome if, she came out of that. So she'd already decided that this was her time. As much as that was devastating and heartbreaking for us to hear, we had to respect her wish, and that she was tired. Her body was giving up. She got pneumonia. It just wasn't her, it was her time. And she was only 74. So we sat with her, and over a space of 2 days. So I had made it in time, and 2 days later it was, that was it.
Talk about so much going on at once, and, like the joy of your pregnancy, but also this very deep knowing. And, looking back on it, I would imagine you're so glad that you followed that intuition, that very strong intuitive call to just say, you know what, against all odds, let me just do this. Because you didn't know necessarily this was going to happen, but something in you knew that this was important for you to be there.
Yeah. And I think having to do that trip solo as well, because my husband couldn't go directly at that time because he needed to get a special visa for New Zealand. So he had to wait a week before he could come. But by that time he didn't make it in time for her, but he got there in time for the funeral. So it wasn't, and supporting my dad, and my dad was quite ailing at that stage. So he was in a wheelchair at that stage. So he couldn't walk, but he was physically, he was mentally brilliant, but he was, they just missed their 50th wedding anniversary as well. It was 2 months shy of their 50th wedding anniversary, which is absolutely gutting because we'd made plans to go for that special occasion, but unfortunately they didn't make it. But they made 50 years together, that was still amazing. So that was mum in 2014, and then I got pregnant. So I had Lara in 2015, and I hadn't grieved mum the whole time I was pregnant, really. I just kind of put it aside because I was dealing with pregnancy and becoming a first-time mum, but it really, really hit me as soon as I had Lara. 9 months after that, I went on antidepressants, so I was going through counselling. It was just, And then when Lara was 9 months old, I went back to see my dad, and we spent Christmas with him, and he got to see Lara, which was really lovely. And then having to pull myself away from him again, but we had to put him in a home about a year later, so I had to go back again and put him in a home. Meanwhile, I'm doing all of this because my brother's starting to go downhill health-wise because he developed a heart issue. And
was your brother in New Zealand or, with your parents at the time? Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't living near my parents at the time. So, but again, I'd struggled a little bit with since I was a teenager, my brother had become ill as well. So it feels a little bit like there's a real trend here, but it just happened to be that my mum and dad and my brother weren't well pretty much my entire time of growing up. But my brother developed bipolar. He got really sick with other ailments and things. So he was, had a rough time from sort of my teenage years onwards. But the heart issue was, we thought it was, one of those things where he would have surgery and he would get better. And unfortunately, so 2016, I was the last time I saw him. And then a few months later, he went into surgery. Had heart surgery, thought he was getting better, but it wasn't fully recovered. He wasn't fully recovered 100%. They said it had worked about 60%, but he was still having issues. I had another baby in the meantime, so we had our second one. We moved house. It was just all encompassing, like, oh my gosh. And 6 weeks after my son was born, I got a phone call from his fiance at the time, his fiance's daughter, not my brother's daughter, but his stepdaughter. And I'll never forget the call at 11 o'clock at night, and I was feeding my little one, Asher, at the time, and she said, he's gone. I was like, what do you mean he's gone? She said, Alice is gone. I was like, he had a massive heart attack in a hotel on his own. One morning they couldn't raise him or get him out of the hotel, and they found him in the shower. So he'd had it. Luckily it was quick, so I could that much of a blessing. But so that was a complete another curveball and shock, and I just went into full grief mode again. And I just
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. No, it's after that it was when we decided to move to Spain, because we'd already thought about it before, but when I was pregnant and we were moving house, it wasn't really a go. And then after my brother died, and my mum, it was just too much. Like the UK was also a lot of memories as well. My parents were both from there, so I was surrounded by all of, their life there. And I don't know, it seemed right. And, when my husband got that offer to go to Madrid and come here, it was just a chance to start afresh. It was, why not when the kids are so young, the language. To be honest, when you said before about, it's brave to do that, but I honestly think I just thought, oh, son, Madrid, it'll be cool. But honestly, I never really thought much about the language issue. I just we packed up the house and the truck and everything else and stuck our whole lives on a truck and just went. And I kind of I just thought about the rest later. It was just bizarre.
Sometimes not knowing is the thing you need. Sometimes not knowing is actually it works in our favor.
Sometimes just taking the leap is just what you need. Right. And I think in grief too, you tend to make a few rash decisions, maybe hoping that you'll find some relief or something that will stop you from thinking about this awful tragedy that you're going through, and it did help. I don't like to think I was running away as such, but sometimes we do need that shift and that change. My dad always used to say this. His favorite line was calibration. He recalibrate everything. Just sometimes we just need to take back and stock and recalibrate. That was his favorite line. But after we got to Madrid, things were starting to sort of stabilize a little bit, but I knew Dad wasn't going great. About a year after we got here, I ended up having to go back again to New Zealand, but this time I took the kids with me, and they were still quite little. I took them on my own because we had to move him into palliative care. He was going downhill quite fast. So I did that trip on my own. It was only about 2 weeks, and had the kids with me because I wanted them, if this was going to be the last time I got to do this trip to see him, then I wanted it to be a memory that at least he got to meet the kids. He'd already met Lara once, but Asher hadn't. So it was nice to have that memory, So I did that trip on my own and moved him into the palliative care. And then I got back and things were physically not great with me either. I was going through, I have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and over the years I've had many, many surgeries. So my physical ailments haven't been great. And so I've had to manage that, moving to a new country, parents passing, brother passing. And so it all, it has been a journey for sure. And 9 months after I got back from putting my dad in care, he was going downhill pretty fast. And I'd already had to make the decision to go into a surgery that was a foot surgery that was quite urgent. So I had to go. And I knowing the risk I was taking, knowing that I couldn't get on a flight for at least 2 months.
Right.
And sure enough, Christmas Eve of 2019, Dad decided that was time. So yeah, that was another one where I wasn't there for it. And it just, so my brother or my dad, I wasn't there for either of them, or able to be part of the funerals, or even my dad, because of course I was the only one left at that stage. I couldn't there was no one else to do a funeral for him, and I wanted to be there,
Right.
So I'd already organised I was making plans after he'd gone to go in the April and do his memorial, have farewell. We had to have, he was already cremated and things, but I just had to do that.
The
But
ceremony aspect of it, the final.
Well, exactly, yeah, just that part. But then guess what? COVID hit. So I wasn't able to, by the time I was ready to fly and I was getting clearance to fly, COVID hit. And it was, so yeah, I felt like I got stuck in a year and a half worth of just limbo, grieving, lockdown. We had a really hard lockdown here too. We had 100 days of not allowed to even really, we had 40 days of not going anywhere. We weren't even allowed to leave the house. And then the rest remainder was, we had walks and stuff, but it was pretty tough, 2 little ones, husband working at home, it was just,
I can imagine.
It just snowballed.
Multiple forms of grief, definitely. That's definitely a lot. And I would like to pause for a moment and give you the opportunity, if you would like, if it would serve you, to say their names and just take a second to remember them. And if you would like.
Thank you. It's really sweet. Yeah, my mum was Margaret Elizabeth, and Lara has her name as her middle name. Nice. So she's Lara Elizabeth. My dad was Anthony John, and my brother was Alistair Paul. And our family name was Waters. So yeah, my maiden name was Moira Waters. But yeah, but unfortunately that name has kind of now come to a sort of a standstill, because I changed my name and my brother never had any kids of his own. So yeah, that lineage is sort of stopped now with the Waters name, but that's okay. It's, it's one of those things.
We honor them this way, this is how we get to remember them, and they in a way live on through these stories and through saying their names. So taking this moment to just kind of, remember them. And I always light a candle, I think it's back here somewhere, to just remember our people.
Thank you.
And you touched on something that's very personal to me, very, very personal. My family is similar in composition in terms that it's mom, dad, brother, and myself. And we were talking before, I lost my brother. And so this whole identity, like who are you now, is so layered and nuanced. And my parents, thankfully, are still alive. But one thing that I think about and weighs extremely heavy on me, weighs so heavy on me, is, for example, I don't have children. And, I thought my brother would have children and he didn't. And so the family name, that's something I struggle with. And, it's very heavy in my heart that once my parents pass, if you look at it as a family tree, that branch ends with me. And that's very heavy to carry forward. Sometimes that's something that I struggle with. Now you have children, and yes, they still live on in a way with your children, but there's a heaviness there. And I want to highlight it just because if you're listening or watching and you can identify yourself in these stories, I just want to acknowledge that is something worthy of grieving. That is something worthy of taking a look at it and saying, yeah, sometimes that can be very painful. That's a painful reality. And yet life goes forward. But these are the things in grief that are so nuanced that sometimes sting a little bit or a lot as we navigate our lives. I saw myself reflected in that part of your story. And I was like, wow, that's something that weighs on my shoulders as well. So I see you, and I see
you too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to ask you, what was your understanding of grief before all this happened? So even before your mother died, is it something that you even were familiar with, or you learned it, when your daughter was born? I think you said your first daughter was born. That's when everything kind of got triggered and moving within.
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that question, because if I had said to myself, had I experienced grief, I would have before my mum passed. Yes, I had, but I don't think I really identified with it as a real struggle. It's a difficult one because I lost my grandparents. My mum and dad were both expats in New Zealand as well. So
Mm.
mum had left all her family in England, and my dad, his parents moved to New Zealand. But I lost my granddad when I was 8, and then my grandmother when I was 17. And I actually was with her when she passed. I watched her.
Mm.
And so she was of a ripe age of 91, which is a great age, but I wasn't particularly close to them as grandparents. I think I was closer to other family friends that mum and dad had made as a result of being expats. We had some amazing family friends through, mum was Baptist. She was, religious. And so I grew up in church, and we had a lot of, church family and church family life, and they became my family. They were, and I had a particularly close relationship with, what I called them then was Auntie Chris and Uncle Keith, and he lived to a ripe old age of 99. But unfortunately his wife didn't. But they were like my grandparents, but even though they weren't blood. And I was more devastated actually when they passed. I think Papa died after, we called him Papa as well. He died after my mum died, but I still, I think I didn't really experience grief properly until mum passed, even though she lost her parents, but she never talked about it. She never really, dad lost his parents. I never really got to feel grief in the home or be exposed to it that much. I never really knew how sad mum was because she didn't talk about it. Dad didn't talk about it much either. He had a bit of a fraught relationship with his mum as well. So it was never really evident to me, grief, until I lost mum, I don't think. And it feels like a blur when it first happens. And I think the most poignant moment I realized that mum was gone was it was in the week of after when Lara was born, and I was having real struggles with breastfeeding, and I lost it. I just couldn't. And actually my husband's mum was there at the time, and we hadn't met before either. That was the weird part, is that I hadn't met his mum up until the point where our daughter was born, which was, some people would seem, perceive as a little bit odd, but, we just hadn't we hadn't got that stage where we'd met. And she knew birth. She's an obstetrician. So she's familiar with all of that stuff, but she couldn't understand or get her head around how I was in so much pain and crying so much for my mum, because I wanted and I needed her in that moment. So yeah, I think that even though it was the first, yes, it was the toughest. My brother, different story again. My heart goes out to you so much when you talk about your brother,
Yeah.
and it just, even, that only sibling thing is really painful. And even though my brother and I were very, very different, he was a protector, he was a really big brother.
That's beautiful. And it changes initially. Let me phrase this carefully. Initially, it could feel like it changes our identity. I remember, grief shifts how we show up in the world and how we redefine our sense of identity. I have heard, and, let me know if this has been your experience. I have heard people who've lost both parents say like, oh, well, now I feel like an orphan in the world. Like, who do I go to? Right. And I found that so jarring, because I was like, oh no, you always have your parents. And yet I haven't been through that experience. So I wouldn't know, I wouldn't want to correct them in their truth if that's how they feel. And so for me, when I lost my brother, I went back to work, and one of my colleagues, she was just going off about something random. And then she says, well, now that you're an only child, what are you going to do with, and her words faded into the background.
Ooh.
And I said, what did you just say? And that was the first time that I realized that maybe I am an only child now, right? And it distorted my sense of identity so severely. I think I even went home early. I can't remember. but I felt just this very tight knot in my stomach because I said, wait, does their loss redefine who I am, my sense of being? And that thought was so terrifying because the foundation is already so unstable and shattered and disorienting and all the things. There's so much to do logistically for the burial and the memorial and decisions with their things. And on top of that, we have to say, oh, and I'm this and I'm that, and all these labels that I don't feel belong to me. So, and it took me a while, and I would like to know your experience, but it took me a while to digest those thoughts, come to terms with those thoughts, understand those thoughts, and say, no, I am still his sister. He's still my brother.
Yeah.
We still have a relationship. It took me a while to get there, but now I can solidly say I am not an only child. I am, by technicality, yes, I will probably have to bury my parents alone and all these things. However, I don't feel like an only child, and I think that matters more.
And you shouldn't. There's so much to remember from when we were when we were children, and our memories of, that's what keeps me going sometimes, because even though we weren't that close, we had some great times together, and those are the things that we can hang on to. And if I'm being completely honest with you, my brother probably wouldn't have seen old age because he was so sick. And he had struggled for a long time. So I feel like he's relieved in so many ways without sounding, it's a hard one because I knew how sick he was.
I understand.
He was really sick, and I didn't know. I mean, Mum was already gone at that stage, and also Mum and him had a fraught relationship towards the end as well, because my mum had seen my brother through so many trials and tribulations throughout his life, and yet their relationship wasn't great towards the end before she passed. And so I like to think now that I hope that they're together, worked all that out, and that's, there was a reason they got together again, and he's not in pain anymore. They're both not in pain anymore. They've been through so much in their life. It's not to say anybody should go the time they go. He was only 47, and it's young. It's too young. I thought 74 was young. My mum was, but it's just one of those things. And I'm coming up 47 next year, and I think, yeah, unfortunately, these thoughts do go through your mind, but I do everything to try and counteract that. And, I do lots of things that I know my mum and dad didn't do health-wise, and, it's just that they weren't physically able. So I try and keep on top of all of that stuff. But, it was just his time, unfortunately, and it still hurts a lot, obviously. But, I see videos. He was so good with kids too. When he first got to meet Lara, he was besotted. Like, I'm so glad I've got videos of him with her so that she knows who her uncle was. And, it was his birthday a couple of weeks ago. He would have been, he was born in 1970, but the morning of his birthday, I woke up and she'd put this is how much I talk about my lost ones, my loved ones. She'd put a candle out with his photo next to it and a happy birthday sign below the candle.
That is precious.
I think that's, for a 9-year-old to do that, and that makes me know that I'm doing okay telling them about their family that's gone but still here. They're still with us, and I'm actually quite proud of that. I usually play down things a little bit, but I'm actually really proud of that because I think it's important to keep their memory alive by talking about it. Like I said, my mum never talked about any of this, and I cry in front of my kids. I embrace the moments that I am grieving, even though they might not be that pretty. I still, I think it's important to tell them and show them how much, grief is okay, because we weren't brought up with that. And that's what we're trying to change a little bit too.
I completely agree. And I see it as important. I don't have children, but we can't shelter people from the reality of life, and loss is a reality of life. And I feel like we wouldn't be so blindsided had we understood it a little bit better, had it been introduced as a normal part of life. And what do we do in these situations, and how do we handle these things? The shock will always be there. Even with your 3 losses, I'm willing to say that you probably experienced them so differently for many, many reasons, because they were different types of losses. Some you were there, some you were not. You know, there's so many layers to each one. But children know, if they're taught to deal with their emotions, we are built for that. Emotions are part of our human makeup. And I think it's so important to learn how to navigate them. Even just this morning, this person I was talking to, she said, I just lost a pregnancy, but I don't want to cry about it. It's just not good. It's not good to cry. And while I respect where she's coming from, because that's how she feels, that's okay. We respect people's feelings. I wish we would make it so okay to cry and so okay to feel it all. And I love that your daughter, for example, made a little celebration for her uncle. And how beautiful is that? Those are the little things we can do that are really big in the end. I love that.
Yeah.
Kudos to you.
I think it takes time. Thank you. I think it takes time to get to that point. I feel like the journey of accepting the fact that they're not here anymore is so up and down all the time. And we always talk about it's not linear, and it's true. It's not.
Right.
And it's taken me, so what is it now? It's 7 years since my brother passed almost. And I feel like it's taken me this long to be able to talk about it openly and not get frustrated when my kids bring him up or any of, my their grandma or granddad. Because for a while there, I just couldn't. I could talk about how I was grieving, but I couldn't accept the fact that they were talking about their grandparents because they were gone, and I just thought that was so unfair that my kids are having to grow up without grandparents. And it absolutely rips my heart when I hear the kids talking about, because you probably know this already, but Spanish culture is so ingrained with abuelos and
the extended
grandparents
family,
and family, the extended family. My heart aches in 2 different places every time I see a grandparent outside looking after their grandkids. They do it on a regular basis every single day, and it absolutely breaks my heart that I can't give that to my kids. So we try and replace it with the friends that we've got, and older friends, parents, parents of my friends, and those kind of things. I know it'll never be the same, but actually it's what I grew up with, and I didn't miss out on a heap. I may have the odd twinge here and there wishing it was different, but overall, I think my mum and dad did a great job of, giving us surrogate grandparents, and I'm really super grateful for that. So yeah, it does hurt a lot when, and it takes a while to get to that stage of being able to talk freely about them again, accepting the fact that the kids are older now and they can talk about their grandparents that aren't here, and they might slip up with something that they're completely unaware of, because they don't really realize. Like my son's only 6 still, so he'll only talk about, them in the present tense, which actually isn't a bad thing. In a sense, I still talk about my parents in the present tense sometimes, just out of habit.
Right.
So I shouldn't think that it's weird that my little ones come out with, can we go and see my Uncle Alistair, or can we go and see Brandon? I shouldn't think it's weird, but it still hurts,
Absolutely. Tenses can be such a tricky thing to navigate, especially right after that loss.
Yeah.
I talk about my brother is, and I catch myself saying that all the time. And I used to correct myself. Now I don't. Now I'm like, he is in a way.
Yeah.
He's not here physically, but he still is in everything that I do. So he still lives on in that way. It's all about your preference. It's all about what feels good to you and right to you. If it's helpful to you to say is or was, use whatever word sits right with you.
It is. It's not easy. And we all do it at our own pace as well. And if you've had multiple griefs, I always say I know we'll talk about this in a second, but, I treat clients on a one-to-one through grief education. And, some of them, I always say to them that death shapes the grief, and whatever you experienced, and obviously multiple griefs, if you've had multiple griefs, sometimes you haven't grieved the first one. And, the type of grief that we experience, it depends on how they passed and how you experienced it. You could have been waiting for them to go, or they went suddenly, or any of those scenarios, and it'll always shape the way we grieve. And it has been different every single time for me, and yet one compounded on the other makes it a completely different path all over again. So it's just, there is no right way to do it. It's, you can
Truly.
get help, obviously, and we can do all of these things, but it's okay to still not be okay as well. There are so many times where people say, oh, how have you got through to where you got, and why are you so good now? I'm not all the time. I'm not. I've made it past for myself. Yeah, sure. But it's not good all the time. I still miss them like crazy. I have my bad days. I get hit from the left and then the right and then, and I'll pick
Yes.
myself up again. But I let myself feel it too, and I sit with it because, I know I've done a lot of work too. I'm quite proud of the work I've done so far and the effort that I've put in to get where I am, because, I went through a really rough stage, and, I admit that, but it's not easy. You know what it's like. It's not easy, but it's nice to be able to say that you have come through the other side just a little bit, enough to be able to function again and help others. And, what you're doing is amazing. What I'm doing is amazing. We're sharing a story so that it helps and it inspires others to hopefully get through this non-choice of a club that we're in,
Right. The worst club ever.
That's
But we're all
even
here.
the English right way of saying things. But yeah, it's just whatever, we're in a club that we didn't choose to be in. So
Absolutely. And, you know, how did you start that journey? A lot of people talk about grief work. What does that mean? What did that mean for you? And how has that shifted into actual grief work? Like you actually work in this space now. So how did it go from personal
yeah,
journey into the education, into the profession?
I feel like there's a longer background to all of this. I don't know what it is, and I can't always pinpoint how to explain it clearly, or even if it makes sense. But my dad in particular has a lot to do with where I am. So, okay. GriefSpan is my grief education business. About 2 years ago, I really started getting a passion or inkling that I really wanted to do more with my grief in terms of helping others. And I was looking for the right course, the right path, the right thing to do to get some certification, or at least go on a journey of my own, if not to do anything else but heal as well. I was going through therapy as well at the time anyway, but I felt like I really needed to educate myself a little bit more on what is a good way to grieve, how to get through this, how to potentially help others get through this as well. And then, I sort of looked at a few, and then they didn't speak to me. And then when I came across David's, it was actually by a friend of mine here who I got to know through the expat community. She's Colombian, actually. She had just done the course of David Kessler's. And I'd known of David because I'd had his books, I'd seen stuff, I'd, read about him as well. And, I loved his work, but I didn't realize he was doing this grief education course. So she got me into that, and I signed up in the summer last year, and I would have graduated about this time last year. So it's about a 3 months commitment, which is really nice. And it's a great community, and you do it all online. And David's great because he's there personally. You get to ask questions personally, and the classes are once a week. And it's a nice level, especially when you're a working mum and you're trying to juggle all sorts of other things, but you have this passion and goal to do something else. So it was perfect for me. And then GriefSpan was already a name I had for about 2 years. I'd already had the Instagram page, so it was there in the background. It was kind of, just simmering away, not doing anything, but I knew it was going to be something one day. And the name GriefSpan was very personal for me because my dad had a company when I was growing up. He and I had this little project called Timespan. And Dad was a prolific writer. He was a journaler. He used to journal a lot. He was a photographer. And he used to tell stories all the time. And so he had this little project that he used to work on called TimeSpan. And he turned it into a company of taking photos as well. But he used to journal these stories of historic moments, and also, which I don't think I've told this to anyone before, but he used to do projects around headstones and cemeteries, which might sound a little bit bizarre to some people, but he used to photograph the journey of the headstones and how it deteriorated or how it weathered over time. Really bizarre, right? When I say it out loud now.
Well, it's interesting. Now I'm in this space, so it's actually fascinating to me, I think. And that subtle connection, subtle, not so subtle connection between, you know, his interest in the art and then now.
Yeah, but it's quite, when I think about it now, and it's almost like I was pulled to tell you that, because for some reason it's really, when I think about it now, it has so much meaning, you know, and I've got all of these sort of journals of these photos of headstones, and a lot of the headstones were of people that we'd lost along the way on journey of their like friends, or, you know, their friends in the older time of their life that I knew as growing up. So yeah, that was my dad's background. Was he was an engineer by trade as well anyway, but he in his spare time was this kind of all this prolific writing, and he was so methodical about everything. So anyway, so we together, when I was growing up, we created this little logo even for TimeSpan, and the colors were purple and green. They became like our go-to colors for all sorts of stuff, and it was kind of my dad and I's thing. And I thought that was just so cool. You know, I had this little project with my dad, and it was a connection that we had. And we always had this real little, you know, sort of bond of work life type of stuff, understanding of the world history and what's going on in the world. And he was always fascinated by world events and all those kind of things. So, and he used to document these stories, and hence why it was called TimeSpan. So when I wanted to do this grief education course and turn it into more of a helping others, GriefSpan kind of just, and bridges as well. So I have a bridge in my logo. Another reason because of my dad as well, because my dad had this fascination for bridges, and everywhere I went, I would take photos of these famous bridges for dad. I went, you know, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Millennium Bridge in London, Tower of London, all of the, you know, all of these bridges that I would take photos of and send back to dad for him. And because he was an engineer, he just loved all this stuff. So it's very, very personal. You know, GriefSpan has a very personal backing and story for me, and passion. That's why it's been such, and it's been easy. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's been so natural, this whole progression of GriefSpan, since I really kicked it off in February. And the response has been incredible. I still can't get over how lucky I've been in attracting the community that I've created, and the people that have come my way, the stories I've learned, the people I've touched. Oh, I'm getting chills. Sorry.
I've seen your community grow so fast, and it's bittersweet because sometimes I say everybody that's connecting with us, usually it's because they lost somebody, and yet it's a natural part of life, and we may as well connect because we're all in this together. Your logo is beautiful, and now even more so now that I know the symbolism behind it, and that your dad's so connected to what you're doing now, that's really beautiful. And for those who would like to connect, speaking of connection, where can they find your page?
Yeah, so on I have Facebook as well, but I tend to have a lot more following on Instagram. It's been my sort of go-to wherever. So it's at GriefSpan Education, and also my website, which is just griefspan.com. And so both of those, yeah, the website still it'll always be evolving, but it's one of those things I just put up. But it's, yeah, I love it, and it's a real passion, you know, the whole, you know, creating content. I like to think I stay on the sort of more positive side of grief, if that is even possible. But I like to think that, you know, I like to share messages of positivity when it comes to grief, and where it is possible to get to, even if you don't believe it at the time when you're in that space or wherever you are in your grief journey. It's quite, I mean, I wouldn't have, you know, if someone had said to me 6 years ago, or when my mum first passed, that you'll be a grief educator in 10 years' time, helping other people all around the world, I would have just gone, no, no way.
I don't know who you're talking about, but it's not me.
No, it wouldn't have
Yeah.
been, there's no way I could have said I could have done that. I wouldn't have had the strength to. I wouldn't have been able to, stomach any of that stuff. But now it's a real purpose. I found my purpose, and I have to confess, one client asked me a few weeks ago, he says, do you think that would you be doing this if you weren't in the situation of your mum, dad and brother passing? Probably not.
Mm.
But my whole journey would have been completely different. No, I don't. I would have given anything to have my parents and brother here still.
Yeah.
But at least now I can say I'm doing something in their honor, and I'm doing something to tell their story, to keep them alive, and that they're doing this, I like to think this is their story. This is their journey, and I'm just carrying it for them, because there's lots of things that my dad, I know, would have loved. His time wasn't up. He was only 78 when he passed too, and his mind was so sharp. He was a writer. I still think, he could have been a published author. He was so good. But I just like to think I'm carrying that on for him. I'm carrying on my mum's story, my brother's story, but my dad, because of his writing, that's like to think that's where I get it from. They're just living on through me and the kids too. I think it's a nice way to be able to carry your grief that way, and it helps.
Definitely resonate with every word. And I, same. And everybody that I've spoken with for these podcasts and through the page and everything, they say the same thing. I've only met about one or two people who say, no, I had an interest in this, just out of curiosity. Most of the people, they had a personal experience and they decided to embrace grief as part of their path forward in all kinds of ways, usually, professionally, personally. And it's one of those things where we heal as we help others navigate this path. So it's a cycle. It gives, and we give and we receive in this process as well. So it's very healing. I don't know if you've received this question, but a lot of people ask, like, how could you do this? How could you talk about this all the time? And to me, it's meeting people in their humanity and their essence, in their core, in their unfiltered selves. And I think that's a beautiful way to meet people, not the pain, obviously, not the loss. And I think almost all of us would trade it all in his heartbeat, but we're here and we may as well create something beautiful with it and give it so much meaning in a way that resonates with each of our lives.
Absolutely. Like I couldn't agree more. And I think, when we touch people and they send us messages of how much they appreciate what we're doing, and how, it could be something little. Like I get a lot of comments on my Instagram, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for your page. It's beautiful. Thank you for, it's just incredible. Like I never thought I would have this impact, and it's exactly what I wanted to do, and it's, I just feel so lucky. And like you were saying earlier about the community as well, I had no idea what I was going to come across, because it's so beautiful. It is so beautiful. And I'm so grateful for that too, for, all of this little crew that we've got of people that are going through exactly the same journey. And the similarities between some of the stories is just, it sends chills down my spine sometimes when I think, oh my goodness, I wouldn't have met this person. And we've got such similar, paths, and it gives you peace too. And I feel like the more we are sharing this, the easier my grief journey is becoming just a little bit. And the memories are coming back even more too now, I find. The more I talk about my parents, the more I talk about my brother, I'm remembering more. I was just in the kitchen just before I came on here, and there was something, I was just getting dinner for the kids, and it was just this complete random memory. New Zealand is renowned for its fish and chips, and I know I'm going to get flack for the accents on that one, because everybody says every time they meet a Kiwi, they say fish and chips. And, we grew up with that, and we would go down to the beach, and that was the most simplest of things, is the littlest memories that I remember of going to get a scoop of chips and taking it down the beach and feeding the seagulls with my parents, and it's just the little things that, that just suddenly pop into your head, and they don't necessarily make you cry anymore, but they just give you this really warm feeling of knowing that that was part of your upbringing, and what a beautiful life it was, and how grateful you are, to have that life, and with those moments you shared with them. So I think, it can get to that stage. It is possible. I never thought it would be, but I do feel like, if anybody gets encouragement out of, your podcasts and everything else, know that it is possible. It is possible to get there.
It definitely is. I personally believe we're not meant to do this alone, though. And this is where a lot of these grief supporters come in, community curators, coaches, supporters, guides, mentors, all these things. So in your work, what have you seen resonating with people? What has your experience been? What is the biggest need or ask from the people that you've been working with, or anything that you can share that you've encountered through your work that stands out?
The biggest thing for me so far and the people that I talk to is just, it's the fact that my situation is not therapy as such. We can't call ourselves therapists, grief educators. And that's almost a relief for some people. This is not criticism of, therapists whatsoever at all, because I've been through therapy and it's been a great help for me. But it's just more about relating, because like you said before, most of us are on this path because we've got something related to grief or we've been through it. So we're relating to the people. That's the biggest thing that people come to me. I've heard that more times than I can remember now. I am here because I can relate to you. I'm here because I just want to be heard and you understand what I'm going through. Because quite often they're in a situation where their family might, their partner or someone might not have lost someone yet, or they haven't got friends that have lost anybody. That's another common occurrence I get as well, is people that haven't lost, people around them that haven't lost, so they don't understand what they're going through. And it's basically the biggest thing, I think, is people just need to be heard, to be validated, to have someone that understands their grief and the pain that they're going through. It is such heartbreak. It is real heartbreak what we're going through. And to have someone understand that pain and just listen, it's quite often all we need. And I've had therapists before too, sure, but not necessarily being able to relate to my grief. So, and to be honest, not everybody's been through 3 losses either. So it's a little bit, and I wouldn't expect anybody to necessarily understand that. But if you can come across, and if you're in this community, it's easier to find someone that you can relate to. If you get into this community, it's priceless. It's absolutely priceless. And I am so grateful for that. So I think, that's that would be by far the biggest thing I've come across.
Definitely. Grief wants to be witnessed and expressed, and to help each other. Sometimes our just full embodied presence and our willingness to sit with each other without trying to fix is so powerful. So thank you for the work that you're doing. If you were to tell the world one thing that you want people to know about grief and how to navigate it, how to support each other, or something that is now true on your journey, like ever since you experienced grief, something that has become very true for your path, what would you say to somebody maybe early on in their grief, or maybe somebody who wants to support a loved one in grief?
Early on is always difficult because it's fresh. And I think if I was to go back now, knowing what I know, if I would go back to when my mum first passed, it's just lean on people, lean into people. It's the biggest thing you can do, despite what people may say. People will be there for you if you just lean in and ask. You have to ask, because it's not necessarily going to fall in our laps. People don't come forward to ask because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And that's something else we'll can touch on another day, but is the education of, telling people how to react to people that are in grief, because that's part of my journey as well, as educating people on that. But for those that have lost people recently is to lean in and lean on people like myself, that know what it's like. it's now become a job for me, which is amazing, but I still love helping people. And people like me can be just the best listening post, or if you haven't got family, because, I was lucky because I had an amazing support network. I still have my husband and kids, and I have an amazing friend network. That's a big blessing. I have to do a massive shout out to my friends and all of my friends around the world, because honestly, I wouldn't have got through it without them. And they have to know that. And now I'm here for them on that journey. But lean in. It's the biggest thing I can say to people. It's just lean into anyone around you. You'll be surprised how receptive people are to being asked for help. That all they want to know is just, can you listen to me? Can you just spend 5 minutes with me? Can you just give me a hug?
Yeah. Sometimes a hug is all we need. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And how can people work with you? I know that you said you shared your website. It was griefspan.com. But how can people sign on? Are you doing one-on-ones, groups? How can you work with them? How can they work with you?
I do one-on-ones. Yeah, I do one-on-ones. It's quite easy to, I literally have a booking page on my website and on my Instagram. It's all there. It's really easy to do. And I offer an initial 1-to-1 30-minute free consultation as well. That's really needed from both sides, because quite often it's needed to know whether, I'm a good fit for you, or whether we gel, and whether you're ready to take that journey on your, whether you need the help now. You may not be ready to talk about it, and that's okay. But that's the whole reason for the first, 30-minute call, is just to, and then we take you on a journey just to walk you through your grief, help you, give you tools to do that. No matter how many sessions it takes. Some people take 2, some people take 10. It doesn't really matter. It's just, there's no prescribed amount. It's all what is needed for you and what you need. So those are one-to-ones. I will be doing groups in a wee bit. I haven't done them yet, but I'm flying so fast at the moment that I'm trying to keep up with everything. But it's really amazing. Like, I'm so enjoying this journey of just, meeting and being on podcasts and writing articles. And I'm also in the process of signing up for a book story as well. So
amazing.
Watch that space. So I'm really excited for that too. So there's lots to come. I'm sure, I have so much more to give and so much more to tell and share and help. That's my main aim, is to help.
The world could use a lot more of these conversations. So thank you for answering your calling and for embracing this fully and for sharing it with the world. I'm a firm believer that the more we amplify this reality, the more we amplify these stories and share our experiences, the better we help other people navigate, the better we help ourselves. And the more we normalize these conversations, we are going to face grief at some point in our lives. And for those of us who are in grief, there is support out there for you. And it is more accessible than you think. And like Moira said, that 30-minute, I call it a vibe check, a clarity call.
I like that.
To make sure, because, not everybody knows how to handle losses the same way, or not everybody relates to you the same way. And that's perfectly okay. There's so many of us doing this work in this space. Go with the person that resonates with you. Moira is an excellent resource. Her page is amazing. And you could basically connect with people from all over the world, which is so fascinating to me. It's so amazing to connect this intimately with people that you're meeting online for something so personal and life altering, and navigate it together. And it feels like we've known these people forever in a way when we connect with them. I think that's very powerful. So thank you for what you're doing. And I want to give you, a few minutes before we close the conversation to say anything that maybe I didn't touch on, or anything that's in your heart, or anything that you want people to know. This is your space to do so.
Thanks, Nina. I can't think of anything at this particular moment, but I honestly can't resonate enough how grateful I am for people like you and what you do as well.
Likewise.
And, people like Kira. I mean, obviously those two just come to my head, but, people like Blair, we're all in this community together doing what we do. And I think it's just so magical. Our hearts and our journeys are all sort of intertwined in some way. And for some reason, we've all come together to share our pain, to share our journey. And I just think it's so magical. We're on this little I have this little saying, we have this map, and our stories are a map of our life, and we should be sharing that. You know, who else is going to know about it if we don't share it? I think that's just the most important thing, that we're sharing our journey in the hope that someone else might resonate with it and help them. And that's the biggest thing, I think.
Definitely. Well, thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for sharing your mother, father, and brother with us, and for the work that you do for so many. Thank you for being you, for showing up for the work you do, and for your time here with us today.
No, thank you, Nina.
That's it for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Grief and Light podcast. I'd also love to connect with you and hear your thoughts and your stories. Feel free to share them with me via my Instagram page at Grief and Light, or you can also visit griefandlight.com for more information and updates. Thank you so much for being here, for being you, and always remember, you are not alone.